I'm not a marriage counselor or therapist, but I have worked with so many people that I'm usually able to discern when someone will be successful with financial coaching or if they really need a marriage counselor. Not everyone, but a lot of couples can fall into one of these categories. I use the term coachable. By that, I mean, do you need someone to show you a system and get you on your way, or do you have deeper issues that call for a marriage counselor? Before we take a look at 4 different dynamics, I want to talk a little bit about the nerd and the free spirit. When I refer to the nerd and the free spirit, which are actually Dave Ramsey's terms, I'm generally referring to their view on money. In the extreme form, the nerd wants a precise budget, no debt, and building savings and wealth while controlling spending is very important to them. On the other extreme, we have the free spirit. They just don't see why all that importance should be placed on money. The nerd will spend as little as possible, while the free spirit generally shops freely, and just to make life interesting, they usually marry each other. Again, I'm talking extremes here, but people generally have money habits that fall predominantly into one of these 2 camps. And let's face it, if they didn't, the nerd would probably have no fun and the free spirit would be forever broke. But they both need to budget. Why? Because budgeting gives you a limit on how much you can spend, obviously, but it also gives the nerd permission to spend. If the money just sits around in the account unnamed, even though they may have the resources, the nerd may never actually take the vacation. One thing is for certain, neither the nerd nor the free spirit can be identified by gender alone. The truth is there are male and female nerds as well as male and female free spirits. So let's take a look at 4 different marriage dynamics. In the first dynamic, both spouses come to me and say, "We are a mess. We are so sorry. We'll do anything. Can you help us?" In this situation, both spouses take ownership of the situation as well as being personally responsible for fixing it. They embrace change and are open to suggestions, no matter how difficult, to achieve their goals. They view themselves as a team. So yes, they are definitely coachable. In many instances, getting financial traction is just more important to one partner than the other, which is a dynamic I just described as the nerd and the free spirit. They may be coachable or not, depending on the hostility level in their marriage, which is not always evident initially. In the second dynamic, while the free spirit is unwilling or incapable of understanding why getting their finances in order is so incredibly important, they definitely know that it is very important to their spouse, and that's enough reason for them to come to the table. Granted, it's unlikely that they will do the heavy lifting in the budgeting process, but they are a willing participant and they agree to strictly adhere to what they decide collectively during their budget meetings. The key components of this marriage is a willingness to accept both responsibility for their current situation and a willingness to fix it. Again, they're open to new ideas and change. They act as a team, and as I mentioned, they are, yes, coachable. I want to point out that most marriages that I see fall into this group. Yes, there are different intensity levels about getting the money in order, but they love and respect each other, and even if they are fighting about money, they know they just have to resolve it and get past it. They have a let's do what it takes attitude to preserve and heal the relationship as well as their financial situation. Conversely, in the third dynamic, animosity between the nerd and the free spirit has seeped way beyond money. I call this the if he wants it, I want nothing to do with it dynamic. I will explore this in more detail later, but if you find yourself thinking, he wants Italian food tonight, but I'd rather have Thai, Mexican, Chinese, or Indian. Well, frankly, anything but Italian. Take note, I use this example a bit flippantly, but my point is there needs to be a modicum of cooperation in order to make financial coaching effective. I've sat down with couples and started going over their situation. People are not stupid. Even with different intensity levels about money, these clients can see their situation is bleak. But then it becomes equally apparent that one spouse is just not going to cooperate, even with the facts laid out in front of them. In this situation, for one spouse the budget is a weapon, and for the other spouse the only bow left in their quiver to fight back is to refuse to come to the table. They are openly hostile to each other. But it's apparent that it's his goals versus her goals, not team goals. This is a contest. Let me be clear, both are at fault here. Ostensibly, it would seem that the person who wants to get the money under control is in the right, but by now it's not a desire for the good of the marriage, it's to get their own way. My client is always the marriage, so all 3 of us need to be fighting for the marriage. If there isn't the slightest desire to get on the same page with their spouse, they need marriage counseling first, or at least in tandem, but usually first. These couples are not coachable without some kind of improvement in the relationship. The fourth dynamic has much of the hostility of the last example, but it's expressed in a much more passive way. In this example, one spouse feels completely guilty while the other one believes they are completely innocent. And while they are in complete agreement, I promise you that it usually takes two to tango. In this instance, one spouse has most likely been primarily responsible for their financial problems, and they're the one who searches out a coach and seeks help to resolve the situation. They are contrite and they assume all the blame. It would appear that the injured party, so to speak, is completely justified in their anger, but on closer inspection, you realize that both parties are actually complicit in the problem. An example of this is a client who failed to pay the IRS, but also neglected to tell his wife. Sadly, as many do. He was a small business owner, and this was apparently a business decision that his wife would not have normally weighed in on. Clearly, not paying the IRS is wrong, and it's easy to judge the situation and say who's right and who's wrong in this case. But after working with this couple, it became very clear to me that the wife absolutely would not accept any kind of cut in pay, even though the business really couldn't afford the current pay scale. Again, this can be fairly common. So when the month's sales revenues fell short, he continued to pay themselves the same amount, even though there wasn't enough to cover taxes, and so began again. It became clear to me that the unpaid IRS debts were the path of least resistance. Think about that. She created a dynamic in her marriage that he would rather face the IRS and corresponding penalties than to not bring home the amount of money she insisted was necessary to run the house. If not paying the IRS is the easier choice in your marriage, then I suggest there are bigger issues in your marriage than what a financial coach is able to address. And until both parties accept both the responsibility for creating and cleaning up the problem, this is not a coachable marriage. Another version of this type of client is the one who looks for the coach, vets the coach, then brings their spouse in and says, "Fix him!" I most likely don't know what's happening in their marriage to cause this dynamic, and I certainly don't know how to fix it. But it's so apparent up front that I don't usually sign them as a client. They definitely need a marriage counselor. I don't take sides, although I will tell the truth as I see it, but I cannot be bought to fix your spouse. As I said before, the marriage is my client, and not one partner or the other. Ironically, in an instance like this, the person who does all the legwork to find and hire the coach to fix their spouse is the one who isn't really coachable because they don't take ownership of the problems. People need to understand from the beginning that both parties may not be equally responsible for the financial decisions that led to seeking a financial coach in the first place, but they are both, at minimum, responsible for contributing to the dynamic in their marriage. They need to take ownership of both the problems as well as the commitment to resolving them.